Let's move to the last part of our show, Taylor, okay? And we saved the best for last, or should I say worst? Actually, I wouldn't say worst because these guys aren't the worst managers in the league. They are simply the most overrated. So, Taylor, who's the most overrated manager in baseball?
Oh, I did not like this segment, Matt. So I'm going to start off.
And I love these. I love these segments.
Man, it's just so hard with managers. So I'm going to start off with an honorable mention here because I don't know if I can consider this guy overrated, but he made specifically one move last year that I thought was just a real bonehead decision, and that's John Schneider of the Blue Jays. And I also don't know if the general opinion of him is that high to begin with, so I don't know if you can call him overrated. The decision to take out Jose Barrios in Game 2 of the Wild Card Series versus the Twins just didn't get that at all. I mean, and to me, that decision wasn't good, but I could at least see the logic behind it. You know, it's one of those moves where if it works out, you look like a genius. If it doesn't, you look like a moron. Didn't work out for them. I disagree with the decision entirely, but the part that I think really showed the major dysfunction here was the fallout afterwards, because the players were all convinced that that was an analytics department decision. And John Schneider also kind of hinted at that in his comments, but then ultimately was like, well, it was my decision. And then the Blue Jays GM, Ross Atkins, came out and said, no, this was completely John Schneider. Meanwhile, while this is happening, you've just got a bunch of players that are frustrated and angry. So he's my honorable mention there. And honestly, I felt like I needed to lead off with him because this segment was the hardest segment for me to prepare for in the history of me being at House Call Sports, because I don't know if I can definitively say if a manager is overrated or not, because I barely know how to evaluate them in general.
True.
But for the sake of the exercise, I came up with a name. I don't like the name that I came up with, Matt, because I like this guy wearing this manager's hat. It's Scott Servais of the Mariners. And I love Scott. There were some things that didn't really sit well with me at the end of last year. And I think some of those things do fall on him. And I think it's fair to say that Mariners fans and players have expected a lot more out of this team over the past couple seasons, and the results just haven't really been there. And, you know, Scott Servais certainly isn't responsible for all of that underperformance. And I would even go as far as to say that he's probably not responsible for most of it. But the thing that bothered me about this team and the thing that left a sour taste in my mouth was the dissension in the clubhouse at the end of the year and his kind of lack of a strong response to it. And I think that does kind of fall on him, which is why I'm ultimately choosing him for this segment. But the reason why this has been so hard is because he's already said some things so far this preseason that have kind of remedied some of the things that frustrated me at the end of last year. But going back to the end of last year, obviously the Mariners miss out on that playoff spot. Cal Raleigh, big dumper, pretty much the next day comes out and he says, look over there in the Texas locker room. They've added more than anybody else. And look where it got them. Going out there, getting those big names, people who have done it, people who have been there, people who are leaders, people who have shown time and time again that they can be successful in this league is definitely what would help this clubhouse. Should Cal have said this to the media? Maybe not. But the important thing here is that his teammates backed him up when they heard that. Notably, J.P. Crawford, who is one of the other leaders in that locker room, said, I'm with Cal on that. I think we need to go out there and really make a move to help this team. So Scott Servais responds to that with, sometimes being a leader means understanding where you're at and being able to control your emotions. Sometimes there's a better way to go about it. And while I do agree with that, I also think being a leader means speaking up for yourself and your teammates when things are not right. And that's exactly what Cal did. And that's exactly why his boys, like JP, backed him up. To me, that's a pretty clear indication that the players in the Mariners organization thought there was not strong clubhouse leadership from the top down. And at a certain point, if you're a player that feels like you aren't being heard by your organization, it's natural to want to express that to people who are going to understand you, which in this case was the fans. And I think most fans completely agreed with Cal on that subject. And there were also a few small baseball reasons why I decided to put Scott Servais on this list. The Mariners were actually not good at challenges in 2023. Their overturn rate was only 47%, which was in the bottom third of the league. And they have a guy that is largely telling them, if they should go for it or not. So that's not totally on Scott Servais, but that is one of the metrics that management in general is judged by. And also, going back to this butter knife stat we've been talking about, 1 run in extra inning games, they weren't that great. They were 6-14 in extra innings games, 25 and 26 in 1-run games. And that is while having a top 5 bullpen in baseball.
Great bullpen. Yeah.
And I looked up their offensive numbers in high leverage with runners in scoring position, 105 WRC plus, 313 BABIP. So the offense was not the problem. The pitching was the problem. So that does reflect a little bit on bullpen management. The fact that they lost Paul Sewald at the deadline is really important for that metric as well. But still, that is kind of the responsibility of the manager, and that's a place they fell short last year. But now I'm going to flip everything I just said on its head, because a few months ago, Scott Servais came out with a quote that I absolutely loved, because when asked what message he would send to skeptical Mariners fans, Servais said, "We're trying to do the best with the cards we've been dealt." And I love that, because it's a bit of coach speak. On the surface, it kind of means nothing, but it's an important bit of coach speak, because this is him firing that subtle shot at management and ownership and the front office. This is him acknowledging the frustrations of everyone and saying that he's frustrated too. And I thought that was perfect. Also, there was that huge brawl between the Mariners and the Angels in June. I was actually at that game. I got to watch with my own eyes as Scott Servais was in the middle of that scrum, and Skip was just scrapping it in there, man. And I absolutely loved it. So I'm going to end this all on a positive note. I like that Scott Servais can keep his calm. I like that he's that leader that knows when to be reserved and when to deal with things the right way. But I want him to let that dog out a little bit more this year. I don't want his guys to question for 1 second if he has their back or not. And I don't want them to ever question for 1 second this year whether they have strong leadership or not, because they do. And I just want Scott Servais to let that dog out, man.
From a leadership perspective, though, it's so hard to kind of show off kind of being a softer side and then implement the harder side after that.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You kind of have, as a leader,
for sure.
You kind of have to come out showing that harder side, and then, in certain instances, dumb it down and be a little bit softer with certain people. So yeah, it's going to be a delicate balance for Scott Servais as far as that goes. But I'm going to go with a guy, who is currently one of the most decorated managers in baseball. And he's won over 100 games 5 times. Would have been 6 times if 2020 had been a full season. Made the playoffs all 8 years he's been a manager. He's won the division 7 out of 8 years, and the other was narrowly second place, and he won 106 games that year. He's made 5 NLCS, 3 World Series, and has won a championship. Now, the question is, why am I choosing Dodgers manager Dave Roberts as the league's most overrated manager? Because all of that, to me, all of those accomplishments to me, are underachieving. I'm sorry. I need to see more in the postseason. Granted, again, they won in 2020 and in 2017 and even 2018 when they lost in the World Series. It's clouded with sign stealing question marks. Okay. So there's a few arguments in his favor as far as postseason goes. Okay. And then there's the classic, well, it's the playoffs, anything could happen argument. But I'm sorry, to me, consistently with the most talented team in baseball over basically the last decade, you have to do better. You just have to. You have got to do better. The last 3 years, especially, have all been bad. They had a lot more talent to me than the 2021 Braves had. They lost in 6 in the NLCS. In 2022, they were a 111 win team. They won their division by 22 games, one of the biggest margins from first to second in MLB history. And then they lost to that second place team in the Padres and the 2022 NLDS. To not even make the NLCS as an 111 win team is egregious. Then last year in 2023, 100 wins again to get swept by the second place team in your own division again. And the last team to make the playoffs in the Arizona Diamondbacks again in the NLDS is awful. It's not good enough. And for a manager that a lot of people have as a top 3 manager in baseball, it's unacceptable. If you have top 1 or 2 talent, which the Dodgers have had every single year he's been the manager, and then get results as if you're the 3rd through 8th to 10th best teams in the league, that's not how it works. Again, he's got an opportunity this year with maybe the most talented team ever, and he needs to come through. Again, it's not a want to, it's a have to. It's a need to come through. And if he doesn't, barring unforeseen amount of injuries where it ain't even the same team, where it's Freeman and Mookie and Ohtani gets all of them get hurt. I think if they have an underwhelming season this year, if they have another NLDS season this year, he's going to be gone. They're not going to accept anything less than World Series rings for him for the next half decade. And if Dave Roberts underachieves like he has been consistently, he's gone. He is out of there. And for all those reasons, I think Dave Roberts is the most overrated manager in baseball, Taylor.
There was also that weird incident this year this offseason, that weird faux pas with Shohei where he wasn't supposed to say they met, and then he kind of just blurted out like, yeah, we met with Shohei. It's just kind of a weird manager move as well, and that was just a very untactful way to navigate the most important free agent signing of Dave Roberts' career and probably ever. So that was kind of weird, but yeah, it's hard to argue that, Matt. Like, if they don't start winning some championships soon, then they fail.
No doubt. I mean, I could see them, if they, I think another NLDS exit this year, I think he's gone for sure. But if they make a CS or if they make a World Series, they'll bring him back. But if it's, after 2025, and you haven't, with this team, you haven't won a World Series, you've won one World Series and it was a COVID shortened season. Like, you got to make a change. There's too much damn talent on this team for you to keep not winning World Series. I'm sorry. I know that there's, we talked about it a little bit last week. There's that little bit of variance in the playoffs. You never know what's going to happen. You could get the Diamondbacks in the World Series. The Rangers can make a run to the World Series. Anybody can make a run to the World Series. But again, it can't be that variant to where the team with the most talent in baseball only has one championship over the last decade. That's not how it works. I'm sorry. It's just not, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we talk about variance, but they've also had so many chances. They've had so many chances to do it. So the variance isn't really even a factor anymore at this point. It's like you just got to do it. And I think you're right. And, it's hard for me to imagine Dave Roberts not managing that club, but I do think that there is something to be said for just those guys on that team getting a little bit more of a fresh start with Dave Roberts going into the playoffs with them. Maybe they're carrying a little bit more baggage, but if they have somebody else at the helm, maybe they go into the playoffs feeling like a bit of a different team, and like those expectations maybe aren't there quite as much. But I don't know. I mean, this is just another instance of it's really hard to evaluate the inner workings of those clubhouses.
Taylor, if Bruce Bochy was the manager of the Dodgers over the last decade, how many championships do they have?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, boy. More. More would be my answer.
Yeah, more. Definitely more. I would say anywhere from 3 to 5, honestly. Like, I would say anywhere from 3 to 5. Like, they've been that close. And so I think they definitely win the Astros one. I think, a couple of those other ones where they lost earlier in the playoffs, they're making deeper playoff runs. They're able to overcome that. So I think anywhere from 3 to 5. And that says so much about who your manager currently is. If you replace this manager with the best version of the manager that you can find right now in the MLB, which is Bruce Bochy, and you add an extra, I'll be conservative, an extra 2 championships, like, again, that says something about the manager that you have, and maybe, again, you need to look, elsewhere. But again, the players have to perform too. I mean, you look at the offense in last year's postseason; they scored 2 runs a game. Again, that's not on Dave Roberts. Like, Mookie Betts has to play better, Freddie Freeman has to play better. But again, it's at a certain point, it's not a coincidence. Like these aren't just random happenings. It's got to be something coming from somewhere. And in my opinion, it's a lion's share of the blame. Maybe not a lion's share, but a piece of the pie has definitely got to go to Dave Roberts for sure.